We're looking at 1 Corinthians 10, and I mentioned this last week, but chapters 8 to 10 is just kind of one big sweeping point. It's just kind of one big argument. And so you have to look at chapters 8 and 10 as just that. It's one big point that we're kind of breaking down almost into bite-sized pieces, and then we just kind of put it back together again. And so what I'm going to do is I really try to tackle chapter 10 on its own, but there's just too much. I'm not good enough to do it. I know some pastors can, but we're going to spend 2 weeks on chapters 10. I think it's worthy of our time. And then next week, we'll try to put everything back together in a cohesive way, and we'll do that next week. But for today, we're going to hit the first half of chapter 10, and we'll read it in chunks. I'm going to start this way. Back in January, I got a part-time job at a tutoring facility, and I took a break from a part-time job just till I can buckle down in ministry and school, and so I got back into it, and I just wanted to have something kind of chill. I just wanted to do a part-time job because ministry is my main job. This is my focus. This is where I want to invest myself in, and so I just wanted something on the side to kind of support me in that. Support me in my life and ministry, and so I wanted a position where I could just kind of hang out with students, invest in them, build relationships with them. I kind of wanted to go to not a big kind of tutor facility, but a little bit more of a mom and pop kind of place, which it was. And I ended up teaching third graders, and it was such a huge blessing. I lied. It was terrible. I can't even sell that. You know what I'm saying? It was terrible. Like, I was just really thrown off because these third graders are cute. But I quickly began to realize that they're cute, but they're cute little demons. And I want to exposit that. And you're like, oh, you're in shock. You try it and tell me, okay? What I learned was that there's these cute little people, but inside, like, their identity is their demons. And so I want to chat with you. I'm just being honest with you. And I realized that when they get into fourth grade, fifth grade, they kind of phase out it a little bit, and they get into sixth grade, and then now they're just adolescent demons. You know what I'm saying? And so, any amens? Amen. Nice. I went in thinking, okay, I'm gonna, just try to build a relationship with them and be nice to them. And I quickly realized it didn't work. And so I quickly realized I had to turn on, my strictness. And I've been known in the past to not tolerate any kind of like just inappropriateness, excuse my language, BS. I don't tolerate BS in the classroom. And so I don't have tiers where I get stricter and stricter. I just go, I'm super chill, and then I'm just like crazy mean. And so I realized I have to go in every day, like not even transitioning, just be strict all the time. And that's the only way I can control them. And so maybe about 2 weeks in, I'm learning that I have to be like that, and they're learning that I don't deal with any kind of their stuff, and so they learn that they can't mess around. So I'm being really, really strict, okay? Like really strict. It's like I kind of built this reputation where I don't have to say anything, I just look at them, and I keep looking, and then they go, okay. And so 2 weeks in, they're like really quiet, they're doing really well, they're working on their stuff. It's really just this one kid who's kind of the queen bee of everyone else, and so if I have control and power and dominion and sovereignty over her, then the rest of the class will be fine. And so it's going well for me. And then I realized, maybe I'm being a little too strict. Maybe I need to loosen up just a little bit, just give it a little bit. And so I said, okay, since you guys are being good, I'll let you talk a little bit. But if it gets too loud, you're going to have to be quiet, okay? It was the biggest mistake of my life. Biggest mistake of my life. And I'm still fighting indigestion because of it. And so, I learned from that I realized that as soon as I gave them a little bit of freedom, as soon as I gave them a little bit of leeway, a little bit of liberty, they completely took advantage of it. I mean, there wasn't even like a testing period. It's like a little bit of freedom, like just no like levels, no transitions. And so I could not get them back under control the rest of the day, the rest of the week. In fact, they were worse than before, And that queen bee just transformed into something else I can't even explain. And and even like there's this little awkward kid in the back who like never talked. You know what I'm saying? Just sat in the back always, never talked. When you talk to him, he would like really struggle because he didn't want to talk. And then after I said you have a little bit of freedom, he went crazy. He starts doing that dance that Kenner does. You know what I'm saying? He starts doing that in the middle of class. I'm like, what are you doing? If you're going to do it, at least do it right. Yeah, like that's how crazy they went. And so it's stressful because I don't want to be mean. I don't want to, I want them to enjoy their time. You're here. You have to be here. Let's try to get along, but it's not working. As soon as I give them a little bit of freedom, they don't know what to do with it. Okay, do you hear me? And so here's how I want to frame our time together. This entire section, chapters 8 to 10, is about Christian freedom. And so I want you to think and be challenged by this question this week and next week as we close out chapters 8 to 10. How will I use my freedom? So think about what I just shared with you, okay? How will I use my freedom? Will I use my freedom for myself, or will I use my freedom to live in loving obedience? As soon as God gives me this little bit of freedom, do I completely take advantage of it, miss the point of it, miss the point that God wants me to enjoy this relationship and completely go back into the flesh and just go crazy? So that's the overarching challenge of this chapter and this entire section. And I'm breaking up this chapter into 2 weeks. I'm going to go today until verse 13. And today really is just one intense history lesson. Okay, and so don't clock out because it's going to be good. There's a lot to unpack. But really, 1 to 13 is just history. It's just Jewish history, okay? So go to verse 1. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. And all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. So, we got to deconstruct a little bit. Paul is packing into just these few verses the most important historical event in Jewish history. To the Jews, this is the most important event for them as a people. And even for us as Gentiles, because Paul says, don't be unaware, brothers, that our fathers. He's not talking to Jews, he's talking to Gentiles, and so that includes us. In large part, the Jewish faith is the Christian faith, okay? And so Israel is enslaved by Pharaoh in Egypt. Now, there's no way I can't get you to not think about Prince of Egypt, some of you, right? So I can fight it, but whatever, let's just go with it, okay? Don't substitute any kind of animated movie for actual scripture, but if you want to think about Prince of Egypt, I think they do a pretty good job, then think of Prince of Egypt. Get that imagery in your head, okay? God calls Moses to liberate his people from the dominion, the slavery, and the bondage of Pharaoh in Egypt. And Moses freaks out, but he calls him and he goes and he obeys, right? And God says, I'm by your side. I'm going to send these 10 plagues. I'm going to rock Egypt. I'm going to rock Pharaoh. Pharaoh's like, no, he has a cold, hardened heart. He doesn't want to listen to God. He tries to negotiate with Yahweh God, but who's in a position to negotiate with God? And so plague after plague after plague, God is going after these false Egyptian deities. And finally, the 10th plague, God says, well, I'm going to murder your oldest son unless you put lamb's blood over your doorpost, which is a willing submission to God and His authority and His salvation. If you don't do that, then your oldest son is going to die. So Pharaoh, of course, doesn't listen. His oldest son dies, right? And it's almost like, well, what did you think was going to happen, Pharaoh? But that's what happens. And so now the Israelites leave. They leave Egypt, and they're faced with this huge body of water. What is that called, church? Pacific Ocean. No, the Red Sea. Very good. The Red Sea, right? They come across the Red Sea, and I think Prince of Egypt does such a great job with animation with this. But Moses splits the sea, and Scripture even says there's two walls, two bodies of water, like two walls on each side. And can we get that up there? Do you remember this part? This is so crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like that's a whale, like kind of swimming through. You know, you're walking through that. You see these huge two bodies of water. And you're like, at any time God could snap his finger and the water could come back and just demolish all of us. But he holds that water. And they're walking through that, literally on dry ground. And they get to the other side of the sea. And when the Egyptians, Pharaoh and Egyptians come, the body of water comes back and they just get demolished and they get destroyed. You see, this is not just a historical narrative. This is history. This is God in his power and his sovereignty, liberating his people in such a tangible way. It's powerful. It is powerful. But after the Red Sea, that's where the movie ends. Right? Am I right? Yeah, after the Red Sea, that's where the movie ends. When the movie ends, after they've crossed the Red Sea, they are now entering into the wilderness. And that is an entirely different movie on its own. And I think some of us just dismiss that because we think it's all about the Red Sea. Now, the Red Sea is huge, but the wilderness is an entirely different narrative that we have to pay attention to. Do you know why? It's 40 years. Some of you are half that age. You know what I'm saying? That's a long time. Imagine being born into the wilderness and you're raised in the wilderness. All you know is wilderness. Your identity, your purpose, your entire mission in life, it's wilderness. Survive in the wilderness. Survive today. Why? So we can survive tomorrow. All you're doing is wandering. All you're doing is trying to find some kind of refuge. Where? Between trees. I don't know. Like you're just surviving. That's your perspective, your worldview of life. Imagine that. 4 decades, generations of wilderness living. And so we look at that and we think, well, that just seems really pointless. Who wants to go wandering in the wilderness aimlessly? But what we have to understand, and this is how we practice sound hermeneutics, this isn't just a physical wilderness, is it? When we read Exodus, we see the physical wilderness and we understand that that is also a spiritual wilderness. That as they wander aimlessly, that speaks to our spiritual condition as well. So, God's purpose in the wilderness for the Israelites was what? To get them to trust him. It wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. God is manifesting himself in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Think about that. Think about how crazy that is. Right? This works really well for you who don't like to read the Bible. Right? You like crazy special effects. That's for you. Right? It was God, literally God's presence directing you and leading you. So it's not like you go to this pillar of cloud, you're like, excuse me, Mr. Cloud, I'd like to make an appointment with Yahweh. No. It's God himself. It's not God's secretary. It's not just a kind of a sideness of God. It is God himself through cloud and through fire leading you. Now, I love Exodus because I'm seeing more and more that it is a physical story of our Christian life. And I've said that so many times. But I'm not even reading Exodus and it's affecting me. And it just happens to come across in 1 Corinthians 10. So when I say that Exodus is a physical story of our Christian life, here's what I mean, okay? What is slavery in Egypt? Think about that in terms of your Christian life. What is slavery in Egypt? Can I get that up there, the first one? Slavery in Egypt is this. Before you met Jesus. Spiritual bondage, spiritual slavery, working and working and working only so that you can work some more, right? You're headed to hell. You have no destination but that, and you're just exhausted and you're in slavery. See, that is Egypt. So then what is the Red Sea? Well, the Red Sea then is what? Salvation. You come across this Red Sea. How in the world am I going to get across this Red Sea all by myself? God says, I'm going to do it. And he splits the sea. This is salvation. And you walk through that. And you see that process of salvation. Now you get to the other side, and then you go into the wilderness. Well, then what is the wilderness? That's the Christian life. That's sanctification. That's where we are right now. We're in the wilderness right now. Until we die or until Jesus comes back, we're in the wilderness. So then when they get, after 40 years, they get into the promised land, then what is that? Church, that's what we call heaven, and that's where we're all headed. If you are a professing believer of Jesus Christ, you are going to heaven, and that's your spiritual promised land. Amen? Amen. So, all that to say what? Paul's bringing up this intense history lesson, the most important history lesson for Jewish people, all for what? In verse 5, he says, "Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness." So, this is a crash course on Jewish history for what? It's to get these Corinthians to think about the wilderness. Think about the wilderness. Look at me, church. Think about the wilderness. Think about your Christian life right now. Not in a vague, ambiguous sense somewhere over there, right here now where you are. I think we need to pause and be honest with this text. Maybe this is you. Maybe your response as you think about the wilderness is this. So let me get this straight. If the wilderness is a Christian life, why? Like, why? Like, why does God save the Israelites, get them through the Red Sea, just so we can throw them into the wilderness for 40 years? Why does God decide to save me at some retreat or some whatever? And I say this prayer, I gave my life to Jesus, and then all of a sudden, right, I'm thrown into this wilderness. It's just wandering aimlessly. It's darkness. It's confusion. I feel like I'm just surviving day after day, right? And I think the reason I say this is because I think for some of you that might be actually somewhat of a sensitive question. I think I might be actually touching some nerve there because I honestly think that some of us are asking that question. You may not be phrasing it or using the language of wilderness, but you're asking the question, why, God? Why am I going through this circumstance? You're talking about wilderness. What's the point of this struggle that I'm going through right now? What's the point of this turmoil, this despair that I'm going through right now? What's the point of this circumstance that I'm going through right now? What's the point of this entire season of my life that I'm going through right now? You promised salvation. I accepted it. Okay, I know in the future I'm going to heaven. But right now, it's just pointless wandering. So you look at your life situation, and if I'm going to be frank, maybe you're just not happy. Can we, this is what I mean. Let's talk. Let's be honest, okay? Maybe you look at your life circumstance and you're not happy, or maybe a part of your life circumstance and you're not happy. You look at your family situation and you're not happy. That to you is straight up wilderness. You look at your job situation and you're not happy. It's darkness, it's confusing, it's aimless, it's pointless. You look at your school situation, you look at your financial situation, who knows, maybe even your church situation, and this whole thing is just a big mess. It's just wilderness after wilderness after wilderness, or maybe it's all of the above. You just look at your life and you're not happy. And I'm realizing, as a pastor, the more I do ministry, the more I realize how important life transitions are. I'm being honest with you. I don't have ministry figured out. Okay, I'm progressing, I'm growing, I'm transitioning with you guys in a lot of ways. I started ministry with youth kids. I had to get my life into the mindset of a youth kid. And I started EM, now I'm thinking college, and now a lot of you are graduating college. I'm like, hey, slow down. Another year or two in college, please. Just give me some space, give me some time to figure this out. And then we have a couple getting married. I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. And before you know it, you're like, I'm a senior citizen. Already, give me some time here. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to figure out these transitions for you so I can pastor you and be with you in your life. And I'm realizing more and more how important these transitions are, because what happens when you're in college, and I'm not devaluing your struggles as a college student because that was a dark time in my life. But what do you do as a college student? You try to go to your class. You try to go to your classes. You try to be on time. You try to take your exams, and do well. And then you try to show up on time, to your part-time job so you can live paycheck to paycheck and fit in as much boba as you can, between those paychecks. You know what I'm saying? And that's kind of cool, and you're struggling with classes, and that's your period of life. What happens when you graduate college? And I'm going to give you the lowdown here. You have this undergraduate degree under your belt, and then you can't find a job. And so you go back to finding a job that you had before you started college. You know what I'm saying? You got a 50-cent raise. Hey, praise God. And for some of you, you graduate and you're too prideful to go back into that part-time job, and so you just wander aimlessly and you just kind of smooch off your parents because you're too prideful. I have a degree. Why am I doing this? And so now it's time to explore some options. Do I go to grad school just because I don't have anything else to do? You're just setting out all your resumes and no one's hitting you back. Nothing's happening for you. And then it's wilderness. It's wilderness. And then what happens is this whole time you're thinking about resume, you're thinking about career, you're thinking about future spouse, you're thinking about paying your bills, and ultimately you're thinking about this is what life is. This is where I am. This is how I'm going to spend my years as a 20 in my 20s. And then as a result, this is what happens. You feel the darkness of the wilderness. You can't help but let those life circumstances start affecting your spiritual life. It's darkness in the wilderness, and that darkness is not getting any better. It's just getting darker and darker and darker. You feel the isolation and loneliness of the wilderness. Even if you go to small group every week, even if you have friends, even if you have community, you just feel like there's no one in this life with you. Maybe you feel like everyone else seems to have things figured out, but you're the only one. You're the only one in this room for some reason, and you're just faking it till you make it, right? You're just appearing like you have everything figured out, but you really don't. I want to share with you a very honest truth. I think when you get down to the heart of it, I think that there might be quite possibly some people in this room who have this deep anger at God, but we're too prideful to admit it. We're not allowed to be angry at God. We don't know how to be angry at God. Because once I admit that I'm angry at God, I don't know how to process that. I'm too scared to admit it. I think some of us in here are in the wilderness and we're really angry at God. We don't know how to process it. We're too scared to admit it. We're too prideful to admit it. And the question you're asking is, again, God, what is the point of this? What's the point of the wilderness? You saved me. I get that. But now what? So I need you to hear me when I say this. The reason I'm pausing here in the text to talk about wilderness because I have to have an honest conversation with you. What I'm trying to do with you, if you don't know, I'm trying to do this corporate small group with you guys, okay? I'm trying to do, don't worry, you don't have to share. Okay, I'm just going to talk. We're doing corporate small group. I'm trying to get you to look at yourselves in a mirror so you can evaluate yourself. You can actually see where you are with God. Because I think, sorry, I don't know what. So I think the reason that happens is because we get stuck in our progression of faith. We get stuck in our sanctification because we're pissed off at God and we don't know how to admit it. We get stuck in our sanctification because we're hurt by God, but we don't know how to process that. And so, hear me when I say this. I'm not saying this in an ultimate sense. I'm saying this in our discussion about process, in our discussion of wilderness, okay? If you're angry at God, be angry at God. Accept it. Embrace it. So that you can process it and then you can move on. If you're hurt by God, be hurt by God. Go to God and say, God, you hurt me. Why am I here? I don't get it. If you're in the wilderness, you're confused and you're stuck, go to God and say, I'm confused, I'm stuck, I don't know what I'm doing. And I think this might be your fault. Until you do that, you're going to keep showing up to small groups saying the same things over and over, and you're just going to have this circular nonsense responses. Be honest in your relationship. If you're in the wilderness with God, be in the wilderness of God. Because what's the point of the wilderness? That's the point of the wilderness. You have no one else to turn to but God. That's the point. These 40 years that God is teaching his people, the Israelites, what is he teaching them? You don't need these idols, you need me. So, verse 6. Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them are, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual morality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. So let's unpack some history here. Paul is saying, look at the wilderness and learn something. That's what he's saying. Okay, I'm giving you the example of the Israelites so that you can learn something. What is he saying? Here's what not to do. That's what he's saying. Here's what not to do. Don't be idolaters. That's what he's saying. And he brings up some more Jewish history. He says 23,000 died in one day. 23,000 died in one day. Okay, that comes from Numbers 25. I'll post that in a second. Okay, but here's what's happening in Numbers 25. And this is Jewish history. Okay, so we got to unpack this a little bit. The Moabite women are seducing the Israelite men. Brothers, let's stop there, okay? Sisters too, hear me on this, okay? This is why we need small groups, okay? This is why we need small groups. Sisters too, because brothers, if a really hot girl goes to you and says the right thing at the right time, she can get you to do anything. Okay, don't say amen to that. Just nod your heads, right? You know, if a really hot girl comes to you and says the right thing at the right time, she will get you to do anything. She will get you to forsake your job, forsake your bank account, forsake your family, your relationships, and yes, even your faith. Okay? That's why we need small groups. We need these people in our lives to be like, no, she's not good for you, right? We need that. Sisters, you need that, okay? Because that's exactly what's happening here. These are Jewish men, people rooted in their faith and their covenant relationship with God. These Moabite women, they're going to the Jewish men. Hey there, big boy, you want to have a good time? I don't know what they're saying, right? But they're like, yeah, I don't care about God. Yeah, let's do it. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like that's what's happening, okay? And so imagine like how pissed off God is, right? All it takes is some hot Moabite girl, and you're going to forsake me? So this is what happens in Numbers 25, because it's really interesting, the language used in Numbers 25, and I don't have a lot of time to unpack this, but Numbers 25 keeps using this idea of yoked, the word yoked. You know what I'm saying? The Israelite men were yoking themselves with these Moabite women. And these Moabite, God's not racist. It's not a racial thing, okay? It's a devotional thing. It's a religious thing. Because when they yoke themselves with Moabite women, they're not just ditching God's heritage of people of Jews, they're ditching God. Because what happens when you yoke yourself with a pagan woman? You start worshiping their pagan gods. And so they're yoking themselves to these pagan gods. And so God is now saying, I'm getting pissed off, guys. Okay? And yes, God gets pissed. And so this is what happens. This is Numbers 25, verse 6. And there you go. And behold, one of the people of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman to his family in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the whole congregation of the people of Israel. So they're in the middle of church. And while they were weeping in the entrance of the tent of meeting, when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose and left the congregation and took a spear in his hand and went after the man of Israel into the chamber and pierced both of them, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. Thus the plague on the people of Israel stopped. Nevertheless, those who died by the plague was 24,000. That's just a linguistic issue. 23,000, 24,000. Don't get caught up in that. So what's happening is these Jewish men are falling under the seduction of these Moabite women, and they're giving themselves religiously to these pagan gods, and God now is allowing it to stop. He's purging the pagan worship. And as a result, 23,000 people died. It was a result of no self-control. They forsake their God, they forsake their identity, they forsake their purpose, they forsake everything that happened in the Red Sea and the wilderness. They forgot all of that, and they gave themselves to this. They're basically going to God, and they're giving him the middle finger and saying, God, F you, I'm going to go and worship and love other gods. That's what's happening. And Paul is saying, your idolatry, not only is it forsaking God, it's going to lead to your own destruction. 23,000 people, guys. I think Artesia is something like 18,000 people. So Artesia and then some, dying in a single day because of their own idolatry. Verse 9, we must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example. They were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So, a lot of history that we just unpacked in just a few verses, but here's what Paul is doing. He's getting these Corinthians to think about their idolatry. And this speaks to where we are right now because this has everything to do with Christian freedom. What is Christian freedom? Apart from blatant sin, Christian freedom means you're allowed to do anything you want. I said that before. Christian freedom means you're allowed to do anything you want apart from blatant sins. Because everything that we have is a gift. Food is a gift. Sex is a gift. Education is a gift. Time is a gift. Yes, video games is a gift. And it's okay to do these things and enjoy these things, but what happens, and this is where idolatry comes in, what happens is we take these good things and then we pervert them. Idolatry is loving the gift more than the giver. Idolatry is taking a good thing and making it an ultimate thing. It's switching it around with God. And that's what's so alarming to me, because I don't think we take idolatry very seriously. Why do you think Paul is laying out this intense Jewish history for these Corinthians? They're not taking it very seriously, and I don't think we take idolatry very seriously. And I think, I'm not going to yell and go crazy, and start pointing fingers and all this stuff. I just want us to be honest and understand something. It's so dangerous when idolatry becomes normal. It's a really dangerous thing when idolatry becomes normal. I heard the story of a pastor who went to India for this church planting project, and he would travel around. That's what missionaries do. They drive around a lot, and he would see random shrines on the side of the road, which is not normal for us, right? Who has shrines on the side of the road? We see churches and temples, but not these random shrines. And so he's driving around, seeing these shrines on the road, and he's learning a lot about Hinduism. Hinduism is huge in India. They have a lot of gods. It's probably the most non-theological way to put it, right? They have lots of gods, right? A lot of gods, hundreds and thousands of gods, God of ocean, God of sky, God of tree, God of water, all this stuff. And so he would go to the beach and he would see people bowing down, prostrate to the ocean because they're worshiping the God of the water. He would see random people just worshiping outside in the middle of the field. They're worshiping something. All these deities that they're worshiping, living in fear, wanting these gods to bless them. And he's like, man, India is just full of idolatry, right? It's so blatant. And so he's talking with the pastor and his wife, and he says to the Indian pastor and his wife, who used to be Hindu, and he says, have you ever visited America? Right? We always say that, right? Because we just think America's the best, right? Have you ever been to the United States? Have you seen a cheeseburger? I don't know, and she goes, no. Well, I've been once, but I never want to go back. And he's like offended. How dare you? This is my country. I'm an American. And she says, I'll never go back. And he says, why? And he says, that country is full of idolatry. And he's like, what do you mean? Like, do you know where you live? He's like, what do you mean? You Americans worship your sex, you worship your sports teams, you worship your food, you worship your blogs, you worship money. And so if you want to look from God's perspective, there are shrines all over Artesia. There are shrines in this room. There are shrines in your heart and your phones. Do you know why we miss that? Because we've become normalized to them. Idolatry has embedded itself in the culture, and we think that's normal, and we think that's okay. The danger in that is when you show up to small groups and you actually start confessing. You actually start confessing, you know what, I'm going to just come out and say I struggle with porn, and I struggle, every time I go on the internet, I struggle with porn. And then, here's the dangerous part. Oh yeah, all of us do. What can you do? And then you just give up. Isn't that alarming? As God's people, aren't we alarmed by that? When sin becomes normal, when idolatry becomes normal, and it becomes in the culture, and it becomes embedded into our thinking, then we just get so apathetic. And that apathy leads to cynicism, and that cynicism says, what's the point? Everyone does it. And so this is what Paul says to that. In verse 13, he says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. Listen to me, church. God is faithful. And He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, He will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. This is what Paul could have said. Paul could have said, no temptation has overtaken you, but what's the point? You're going to heaven anyways. That's not what he says. This should empower you, church. You need to look at this verse and allow it to break the chains and the strongholds of your life. When there's doubt, when there's cynicism, if you think that there's no point in fighting in this Christian life, you need to take a good, long stare at this verse and get it into your soul. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. He's saying, you think that sins are new to you? You think God is offended and shocked by your sin? These sins existed since the beginning of time. And Jesus has died for them. So, I need to clarify some things here, okay? This isn't about circumstances and life situations. You ever hear this? And maybe maybe you said this before too. God will never give you more than you can handle. Dun dun dun. Let us pray. Right? You know what I'm saying? You ever seen that on a poster, on a T-shirt, on a mug? God will never give you more than you can handle. I'm not here to make a point if that's true or not. I'm just saying that's not what Paul's saying. And yes, it's one of those p-hows going off on out of context stuff again. That's exactly what it is. That's not what Paul's saying at all. Okay? And if I could just be honest with you, I hate oversimplified Christianity. I hate that we have to take cute little Bible verses, make it our own, put it on mugs and T-shirts and think, oh, this is the gospel. That's not what Paul's saying. Are there things in this life that you can't handle? Can we just be really intelligent and responsible with that question? Are there things in this life that you can't handle? Of course there are. You just proved it wrong. Of course there are things in the life that you cannot handle. How do you explain innocent Christians being beheaded by ISIS? Are you going to blog at them? God will never give you something you can't handle. You know, like, how do you explain people who have been captive by human trafficking for years and they can't get out of that? How do you explain people suffering in North Korea and they want to get out but they can't? And let's be real with that here. How many of us are too prideful to admit that we need counseling? How many of us, struggle with things that we feel like we're enslaved by them? How many of us feel like we can't get over grieving over a death of a loved one? How many of us break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend and feel like we don't know how to recover from that? How many of us lose our jobs, and feel like our life is devastated? Like that's stupid to think that there are things that God gives you nothing you can't handle. He's not talking about life circumstances. That's what I'm saying. He's talking about temptations, and there is a difference. He's not talking about life circumstances. He's talking about temptations. And what he's saying is temptations will not overtake us. When you have the opportunity to sin, you have the opportunity to give your heart to this idol, God is saying you have a choice. You have a choice to obey. You have a choice to disobey. That cannot overtake you. You think it might, but Paul is empowering you and is saying, endure it. That's the point of it. Endure it. Church, endurance through the confusion and through the toughness. What does that remind you of? Wilderness. So, all right, let me wrap this up. This is going to continue on to next week as we tackle the second half of 1 Corinthians 10. But I just want to give you something to chew on. I want you to do something this week as you kind of get ready for the second half of chapter 10. Here's what I think we can do. Paul has given us these really intense examples of Jewish history, and is really nailing down this idea of Christian freedom. We are talking about Christian freedom, but one of the most honest ways that you can see what your idols are, in other words, one of the best ways you can identify your idols is to catch yourself complaining about something. Right? That's as practical as I can get, okay? This week, catch yourself as you grumble about something. What are you complaining about in your heart or out loud? What are you grumbling about? What are you complaining about? What is so crazy to me is how we can complain about so many things when we really have nothing to complain about. You ever open up the fridge and it's full of food, you're like, there's nothing to eat in this house. Are you kidding me? You know what I'm saying? God has given you so much and you're like, God, shaking your fist. What are you complaining about? That is going to reveal your heart, and your heart will reveal your idolatry. It's not rocket science. And as you process through that, then you're able to see, okay, this is where I need to allow God to show His grace and restore me and process me. And I'm not giving this to you just as a simple Christian exercise. This is a step for us as a church to move towards holiness. This is how we apply the truth in practical ways. So we'll continue back in 1 Corinthians 10 next week. Pray with me.